right, folks, what's up? Wednesday, April 30th, 2025 is a significant day in history. I'll tell you why in a little while. I'm over here drinking Fit, Make Wellness. It's the last day of the month. Great opportunity for you guys to jump on my Make Wellness team. I got to give a shout out to my boy Hot Seat Todd Spears. He just hit Premier Affiliate for the month. Bam! Waited till the last day of the month to do it. Bam! Making that money! What's up, guys? Hope y'all are doing well. Rocking and rolling. I am still trying to get the filth of Washington, D.C. off of me. Let me tell you something about Washington, D.C. As you know, I was up there the last few days. And yes, I'm going to make up the last two shows. It was an unexpected trip. The White House is sort of last minute when they tell you to go up there. Like, they send you a message, and they're like, hey, we want you to be there. And you don't really have a choice. You get on a... And by the way, they don't pay for us to go up there. It's money out of my pocket to fly myself up there and to stay and to eat and do all the things. So it ends up being about a $2,000 ordeal to do it. And again, I call it an ordeal. It's an honor, quite honestly. But just don't worry. I mean, your taxpayer dollars aren't going to send Chad Prather up to Washington, D.C., so you don't have to worry about that. If you could say no, but I don't. So I went up to D.C. I was at the White House, had no clue. No idea what I was going up there for. And, of course, we were part of the new media press briefing team. I said, listen, in all fairness, I don't deserve to be there by those credentials. I'm a comedian that tells really bad jokes. I'm a hack that has a lot of fun in life. And somehow I've managed to make it very, very successful. And it's a beautiful thing, all because of folks like you who've been a part of the amazing Chad Prather show for so long. But we went up there. And we had a good time. We got to spend a little time with Carolyn Levitt and a number of other friends that were there in the room, not the least of which is my friend and the former press secretary, Sean Spicer, who was there. Always good to see him. And then yesterday I went to the Pentagon. I'd never been to the Pentagon, never really want to go back to the Pentagon, but I thought it was kind of cool that we were at the Pentagon hanging out with Graham Allen. I saw Royce and I saw Amjad, spent some time with everybody up there, so it was good. And we had a good time. But congratulations, Hot Seat Todd, for killing it, dude. It feels good to just come back from D.C. It's a cesspool up there. You know, I was going to say, let me tell you something about Washington, D.C., because I know some of y'all, maybe you've never been to Washington, D.C., but if you have been to Washington, D.C., it's the kind of place where you get a little bit misty-eyed walking around that place, looking up at the marble columns like you're, standing in ancient Rome, looking at all the monuments and the buildings. But I want to remind you that just because a building looks like it could host the gods of Olympus doesn't mean there ain't a pack of rats running the joint. And there are, folks. It's a disgusting place. And I'm talking about the kind of rats that, that wear $5,000 suits and vote to spend your grandkids' money like it's Monopoly cash. You stroll past the Capitol building, and I did the other day. They invited me up to the Capitol to go in, do a little tour with some of the folks in there. And I said, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Gives me the heebie-jeebies because you got folks in there taking selfies like it's the Eiffel Tower. It's the heart of democracy. No, it's like a government-run Chuck E. Cheese with better landscaping and worse morals. Now, behind every majestic statue in D.C., all the granite monuments, all the stuff, there's a backroom deal. Lobbyist briefcase full of donor dollars and some lifelong bureaucrat named Gary who's been sitting on the same desk, task force since 1974 and still hasn't completed the task. So don't be fooled by the Founding Fathers cosplaying the flags up there. D.C. is the world's fanciest haunted house, in my opinion. Except instead of ghosts, it's haunted by bad legislation, inflation, and unelected swamp creatures who think freedom is a suggestion and taxes are a lifestyle. I mean, every monument up there you pass could come with a plaque that reads, built by patriots, looted by politicians. It's the truth, man. And you go to the White House, not even white anymore. It's beige with the stench of executive orders that nobody reads. FBI building is just a really expensive rumor mill at this point in Congress, man. It's just a chamber of public servants, you would think. It's more like an open mic night for narcissists. So the next time you're in D.C., don't just look up at the beauty. Look down, smell the sewage, the metaphorical and the literal. Watch the motorcades roll by filled with people who think your paycheck belongs to them. And remember, those folks, they didn't build the country. They're the reason that, you can't afford a lot of things right now. And the reason you got to go through all the red tape, taxed, and, traded for power stuff that you're having to deal with. And they can't even fix the potholes. So stay skeptical, my friends. Stay loud. For the love of liberty, don't drink the Potomac water. It's full of lobbyist tears and Pfizer runoff. Woo, baby. So I'm glad to be back. And I'm going to make up those last two shows, Monday and Tuesday. I'm going to make them up. I'm going to do it this weekend. We're going to do some specials on Friday, and I might even have a weekend edition. So you guys will have a little something else to look forward to. It's going to be a good show today. Make sure that you're floating those American flags in the channel. I want to tell you about my friends over at Birch Gold. I just did a social media post for them over there. I'm so proud that they partner with us. I'm thankful for Birch, man. They're solid people. They're good folks. Text Chad, C-H-A-D. I spell it Chad to 989898. And let them help you build an IRA backed by physical gold. You got the old 401k or IRA. It's not doing anything or it's not doing enough. Gold is the standard, folks. A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of satisfied customers. Tons of great reviews. A-plus, A-plus, A-plus. I love these guys over here. Text Chad to 989898. Get your free no obligation information kit. You know the drill. Do it. You're sitting on the fence. You're sitting on the fence. They're the guys. They're the leaders in making sure that pure, practical, physical gold is what backs up your retirement account, and it's not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. Got to take a sip of the fit, baby. I got to get the peptides. I was just telling you guys over on a Facebook Live a moment ago. Peptides are those amino chains that help you process and optimize the protein in your body. So whatever you're doing, you can do it better with peptides. Get on my team, dadgummit. People are blowing my phone up. They're like, you're really into this stuff, aren't you? And I'm like, if you feel like crap like I did for the last 2 years, and I did feel like crap, and suddenly you feel good again, all because you started drinking this stuff and it's delicious, yeah. Guys, today's a historic day. I said that. It's April 30th. Today is the 50th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon. Vietnam. A lot of people don't remember that. You know, a powerful human event that the media really kind of ignored. Now, you think that a moment like that, you know, America's most humiliating foreign policy failure broadcast live from the rooftops would have been on every front page, every nightly broadcast, every civic memory. Instead, the coverage just kind of faded. Like the helicopters themselves. You see this clip right here. This is when they were landing the helicopters. They dumped about 50 helicopters into the brink, into the sea, but to make room for more evacuation helicopters to be able to land on these carriers. And so these were military men and women who were dumping the helicopters off. They would evacuate the refugees, the people getting out of Saigon. And you remember the iconic images of them leaving. So a lot of people don't even know this about history. They dumped about 50 helicopters off into the sea that day. And you know why they didn't tell you these stories? Because the story didn't match the narrative that they wanted to sell you. Now, let's take a lesson from that, because the Fall of Saigon, it wasn't a clean victory. It wasn't a noble peacekeeping effort. It wasn't even a tragic but necessary ending. It was panic. It was chaos. It was frantic refugees throwing babies over fences. Helicopters like this one being pushed off aircraft carriers into the sea to make room for more escapees. You got the U.S. Marines holding back screaming allies who had been promised freedom and instead were left to face re-education camps, firing squads, and decades of communism. I mean, there was a story with no heroes. It was just abandoned friends and betrayed ideals at the end of the Vietnam conflict. And for a media machine obsessed with Watergate back at home and moral clarity abroad, Vietnam was a mess that was best left unspoken. Now, you got to remember, Vietnam, I mean, that was the first real theater of battle where war correspondents were televising from the battlefields, and you had people having it transmitted into their homes, the horrors of battle, and people were seeing war for the first time in their own living rooms. And it got ugly. And it made Americans question their government and their press, because there was a blind eye being turned to a lot of things at the end of it. Because the press, literally, at the turn, at the fall, at the end, there, as they evacuated Saigon, the media turned the cameras off. Now, they'd run it all through the war, but then they turned the cameras off. And we were wrong to look away from that. We should have told the stories of the South Vietnamese because they trusted us. We were supposed to be their liberators, the translators, the soldiers, the students. See, we should have documented the betrayal. We should have shown the children in the camps, the families that were clinging to the boats, trying to get out in the shark-infested waters, the thousands who died trying to reach the promise we made, but then we somehow summarily and easily forgot. Because what we fail to reckon with, this is why this is important, and this is what I want to talk to you about. What we fail to reckon with is the thing that we're doomed to repeat. And guess what? We've repeated it. I mean, we see the same signs today when it comes to the media. You have abandonment, spin, selective coverage. You don't have to look any further than Kabul. I mean, it looked an awful lot like Saigon, didn't it? They're running those airplanes out of there, people trying to hang on to the outside of the plane, people falling off of the plane. And we just left people behind. We left our translators, our interpreters. We left a lot of people, a lot of allies, people with security clearances. We left them behind to be persecuted and have to fight against a terrorist organization. We turned the country back over to them. But see, what we did then is the same thing we do now. We gave it a week of outrage. We shrugged it off, and we went back to the celebrity gossip. So I'm going to talk to you about April 30th, 1975. Some of you can remember it. And I want to talk to you about that because I want us to learn a lesson from it. And I'm going to talk about the media bias that's out there because it's absolutely disgusting. We talk about it all the time on this program and the Dear America program. And I want you guys to hear the things that I have to say when it comes to that. So we're going to take a quick little break, and we're going to talk about American financing. Let me pull this up right here. So everything's going on in the economy. It feels like you're walking on some shaky ground. You got the prices that are stuck at a really high point. We're still dealing with some of the inflation stuff. There's people who are living off of their credit cards. Credit card debt is skyrocketing, $187 billion just in credit card swipes. Last year alone. Don't even get me started on 28, 29, 30% interest rates annually. People are just losing their minds. They're stressed out. And I'm going to tell you about my friends over at American Financing because they can help you. They can help you get control back. They can help you access the equity in your home when you go to americanfinancing.net/Chad or call them on the phone at 888-675-4090. When you do that, they will help you get a hold of that equity, and you can use the money to pay down that high-interest credit card debt. So it's going to give you peace of mind, real savings. On average, people that use American Financing are saving about $800 a month, so it's worth checking out. They might be able to close that loan in less than 10 days, which is really fast and efficient and cool. And they don't work on commissions, so they're salaried, which means they're not going to upsell you or try to give you something you don't need. So don't let the chaos of the economy get the best of you. You might even get to skip 2 mortgage payments, which is going to add more comfort. Call American Financing today. Doesn't cost anything to get started. Find out what they can do for you. If you're wondering, go to americanfinancing.net/Chad or tell them I sent you when you call 888-675-4090. 888-675-4090. I loved watching Hot Seat Todd read the disclaimer. He left out a couple of letters, I think, yesterday morning on Dear America. The disclaimer, NMLS 182334, NMLSconsumeraccess.org. All right. Let me go over and check in the chat, make sure you guys are still alive. Y'all still with me? I'm just here. Party Foul Steve is sick. He's sick. And we're praying for him. Be praying for Party Foul Steve. He texted me and said, I'm not going to be on the show today. I said, I'm not even sure you're really fully alive right now, buddy. But let's go back to April 30th, 1975. I was just a couple of years old. And, you talk about the fall of Saigon. It was the collapse of a promise, all right? The end of a bloody, chaotic war, the death of like 58,000 American soldiers. It was the final scene of like a slow-motion betrayal. We watched it unfold. We knew it was coming. And the South Vietnamese civilians, they lined up by the tens of thousands. There were school teachers, translators, soldiers, Christians, journalists, kids. All of them had one thing in common. They believed in the American people. They believed what we had told them. They'd fought beside us. They trusted when the time came that America wouldn't leave them behind. And guess what? America did. America did. We airlifted a few. We left the rest. And what did we show on the evening news? They didn't show anything back then. They really didn't show anything. Not the mothers who were throwing their babies over the barbed wire fences in desperation. Not the Marines who wept as they locked the embassy gates behind pleading allies. Not the helicopters so overloaded with people that they had to be dumped off on U.S. Navy ships. Millions of dollars worth of aircraft, as I've alluded to already, shoved into the sea to make room for one more terrified family. The images existed, but the footage was even there. But the story, the real story, the media blinked. The media flinched. New York Times was already pivoting to Watergate, dealing with the fallout from that, the domestic policy. CBS gave it 2 minutes. 2 minutes. NBC ran a bland voiceover with no names, no context, no soul. Why? Because the media wanted closure from Vietnam. But what they gave us was erasure. And here's why. Because the media wasn't interested in the truth. They were interested in absolution. They didn't want America to look in the mirror and see betrayal. They didn't want us to be exposed as liars. They wanted to paint Vietnam as a misguided effort, a quagmire, a noble attempt that went wrong. All of those are quotations from the media. It wasn't a human disaster, not a moral failure, certainly not an abandonment of allies that we swore to protect. They wanted to just move on, and they made damn sure we did, too. So the press, You know, the press has always claimed to be the watchdog of democracy, but in 1975, at the Fall of Saigon, they curled up and looked the other way. They didn't investigate who got left behind. They didn't ask why our evacuation was so poorly planned. They didn't demand accountability from the policymakers who ghosted a whole nation. And you want to know the worst part? They blamed, get this, they literally blamed the refugees that were left behind. Yeah. When Vietnamese families finally made it to the U.S. shores, they're fleeing torture, they're fleeing re-education camps, starvation. You know what our media says? How many can we take in? Will they drain our resources? Are they going to fit in? You know, the same questions right now that we ask as conservatives about people coming here illegally crossing our border. That's what the media was asking back then, because they didn't want a facial reminder. They didn't want a visual reminder of the people that we'd left behind. So the hypocrisy of the media flip the script along the way because it wasn't convenient for them, or they flip it to where it can be. Are they going to fit in? They're going to drain our resources. We abandoned them. And here's the thing, because you don't hate the media enough. You don't hate the legacy media enough. Because these South Vietnamese coming to America, they went from freedom fighters to freeloaders in a single news cycle. And Americans that were guided by the media's cowardice, they just forgot them, buried them, sanitized it all. So if you want to understand why Americans today don't trust the media, if you want to know why terms like fake news, just stick to us like glue, it's because for decades, the media didn't just get things wrong, they got things conveniently wrong. They edited out the guilt. They trimmed the moral fat. They let our sins dissolve into the static. And you know what? History doesn't forget. And neither do the people that we left behind. I mean, there are still Vietnamese Americans alive today, generations later, who remember watching their fathers taken away in the night. Women who lost their children during the evacuation. Men who served alongside American troops only to end up in bamboo cages for a decade. And here we are, 50 years later, barely a whisper of them in the history books, barely a flicker on the anniversary newsreels. It's 50 years to the day, April 30th, 1975. Here we are. But I mean, there's always time for another Watergate documentary, right? So here's what I want to do. I want to show you what the media won't, because they're liars. I want you to remember. I want you to remember the thing that maybe we've never known or we've chosen to forget. And I want to talk about the stories that the press buries under bureaucracy and narrative management. I talked about the different ways the media narrative works this morning on Dear America, and it just pisses me off to no end to think about it. Because they have this homogenous way of thinking that they're the only right ones in the world. And they start with their arrogance of telling us what they think we need to know. And every bit of it is agenda-driven narrative. So, the Fall of Saigon. You say, why are you talking about Vietnam? It's important, and I want to show you this. Because this was the moment America looked away from the people that trusted her most. The media helped them do it. They helped America do it. Bad news. This was a humanitarian crisis. And I want you to look at it. I want you to look at these images we're flashing up here. Because it's not comfortable, but it's our duty, I think, to tell the right story. See, public trust in the news media. Let's talk about it. And Saigon's a perfect example of this. It's cratered. Like, nobody trusts the news anymore. Many Americans, especially conservatives like you and me, they feel that the mainstream media no longer reports events objectively. But instead, what they do is they filter and distort the stories to fit a preferred narrative. And I mean, we've got surveys that bear all this out. You got, confidence in media fairness is hovering near all-time lows. Only about 3 in 10 Americans express a fair amount of trust that the news is reported fully and accurately. So among conservatives, you got a sentiment that's even bleaker than that. You have entire swaths of the public now that see the press as not only biased, but some going so far as to echo former, it's crazy, the stuff that we just continue to just turn a blind eye to. I mean, it's no wonder that Trump calls them the fake news, and he said, quote, the enemy of the people. He wasn't lying about that. He was right. In 2018, they had a poll, said 51% of Republicans agreed with that label, that they're the enemy of the people. How do we get here? Well, I want you to examine with me for a minute just some examples of how major news outlets just selectively amplify certain stories while downplaying or even suppressing or forgetting others, and how these choices have repeatedly skewed public perception. So I'm going to give you a critique here today, if you'll stick with me. And I want to delve into a few high-profile examples from the past just decade, okay? Just the last few years. A lot of instances are frequently cited by conservative commentators as emblematic of modern media bias, and I want to explore their fallout, okay? I'm going to give you a couple of them. You ready? You still with me? Because, I mean, there's a number of different fake news stories that you should be able to pull off the top of your head, hopefully, that you haven't forgotten, because I don't want them to forget, like the Fall of Saigon. I want to be able to illustrate that such media dynamics, while intensified today, they're not new. They've been doing this thing for decades. Decades. And I want you to think about the consequences for public trust and civic discourse and the growing calls, especially on the right, for media reform and accountability. And I want to talk about that, because if we don't do that, then we tend to fail as a republic. We don't have a press. We don't have a freedom of press. We don't have the ability to tell the stories, and people don't want to tell them. Let me give you an example. Perfect example just happened a couple of years ago. Nick Sandman, Covington Catholic School, January 2019. Lincoln Memorial. You remember this image right here? You remember this video? All of you remember the little smirk on Nick Sandman's face? You had this image, and they knew it was going to go viral. And you know what? It did, and it divided the nation. You got a smiling Catholic high school boy. He's, 15 years old at the time. He's wearing his MAGA hat, and he's in what seems to be a face-off with a Native American elder beating a drum. Now, literally within hours of this image coming out, you had the major news outlets and the social media commentary that were coalesced around a damning narrative that a mob of white Trump-supporting teens from Covington Catholic High School had accosted and disrespected an indigenous elder after the March for Life rally. Right? Outrage. Eruptions. It was immediate, dude. I mean, people were losing their minds. It's like 15, 16 years old. This kid was vilified. He became the face of an entitled, bigoted youth generation. The story, they first told it, they said, it was just clear cut. The boys were the aggressors. They literally told it this way. That Native American veteran, his name was Nathan Phillips, he was their victim. And you had the journalists, and you had the pundits, and your talking heads, and the celebrities. They just pounced all over it. You had threats of online mob calls to dox the students. Those things started popping up online. The school even temporarily closed due to fears for its students' safety amid the nationwide vilification. It was, according to the initial media framing, a morality play of good versus evil, and the press made sure everybody, dadgum, knew who was who. But then, a fuller story emerged, didn't it? Let me check on you guys. I'm going to pop over into the chat, make sure you guys are loud. Allowed to still be over here chatting. Make sure y'all are still good. Yeah, the full story emerged. It came out with a longer video footage. It came out a day later. It radically complicated the narrative. See, because that's what happens. The truth will win out eventually. Eventually. But how many lives are damaged or even lost, tragically, until the truth comes out? See, it turns out that the Covington students had not swarmed or surrounded the guy at all. He approached them. The teens, they'd been yelled at for over an hour by a separate group, which was a radical bunch of street preachers that were nearby. They're over there hurling their abusive insults. The MAGA kids wearing the hats, they responded by doing school cheers. They were trying to drown out the harassment. And then Phillips, the Native American guy, the Indian guy, he wades over into the crowd. He's drumming close to Nick Sandman's face. And so the widely circulated clip that showed the teen's awkward smile was devoid of this crucial context when they first gave it out. But they knew that was going to happen, because in reality, the confrontation was a confused encounter between three groups, not a targeted act of racism by the students. As the facts came to light, the media narrative started to unravel. Outlets were forced into damage control. Washington Post, which had run with the initial angle, eventually published a notable editor's note admitting that, quote, subsequent information either contradicted or failed to confirm key claims of its first report. Jackasses. You had that claim that Phillips had been blocked or taunted by the boys. That wasn't supported by the fuller evidence of the video. You had other outlets followed with the corrections of the updates, but for a lot of people, many people in America, the mea culpas were too late. They were too little, too late. Too little, too late. That's what Nick Sandman's attorney, after WAPO's tepid retraction, that's what he said. The initial impression, you got MAGA kids behaving badly, a bunch of bullies out there, a bunch of entitled kids, white kids to say the worst. You see, that image had already burned itself. The one you see right there, that image had already burned itself into the public psyche and consciousness of America. Sandman became a political symbol at 16 years of age. He sued the media outlets, several of them. for defamation, reaching settlements with CNN that were huge. I mean, Washington Post as well as NBC. I mean, sued the pants off of them. But in the court of public opinion, the incident sparked a national debate over media bias and fake news, even prompting President Trump to voice support for the student and condemn the media's handling of the episode. Now, for conservatives like you and me, the Covington saga, it should remain a searing example of rush to judgment journalism. That's not journalism. So here was a story that was too perfect for a certain narrative. MAGA youths, I mean, they had exactly what they wanted. MAGA youths bullying a Native American elder, and so it spread like wildfire before basic fact-checking took place. And when the fuller truth emerged, it was far less convenient. The supposed villains were arguably victims of misrepresentation. The damage was done, however. You had these teenagers who were enduring threats and slander and the media's credibility. It suffered yet another blow. And so it was an episode that underscored a lesson. When the media outlets act as amplifiers of viral outrage without due diligence, they risk turning false impressions into national convictions, further fueling distrust when those impressions prove wrong. Oh, they would find people on both sides, right? Isn't that what they said about Trump? Isn't that what they said about Trump? And people still, Barack Obama during the election in this last cycle was still quoting that crap. Speaking of elections, let's go back to 2020. Let's talk about the Hunter Biden laptop. Here's one you can't forget about, folks. I mean, October 2020. You got weeks before this heated presidential election. The New York Post drops this bombshell report, right? A laptop abandoned at a Delaware repair shop allegedly belonging to Hunter Biden, who was the son of then-candidate Joseph Robinette Biden III. It contained emails and files. It suggested influence peddling, questionable foreign business dealings. Now, under normal circumstances, this would be a blockbuster scoop. You got the son of a potential president. And he's entangled in corruption scandals and some other freaky stuff going on the computer. Yeah, it wasn't a frenzy. It wasn't a frenzy of corroborating reporting, but it was rather a near-coordinated attempt to snuff out the story. Social media giants and a whole bunch of leading newsrooms, they froze the Hunter Biden laptop narrative in its tracks. How many times have I shown you this? I literally had to paint this picture right here of Hunter in his breeches and his red scarf, that iconic picture that was on the laptop, because if you posted the actual photo of this, you got banned for 30 days on Facebook. So I painted it so I could use this image. It wasn't a real image. All likenesses were accidental. You'd get banned. Now, you had Twitter. This was back before Elon bought it. You had Facebook. I mean, they did unprecedented steps to restrict the story's reach. I mean, Twitter blocked users from sharing the New York Post article, even locking the Post's account for weeks. Facebook algorithmically throttled the spread of the story. At the same time, there were a whole lot of people in the mainstream news outlets that refused to report on the laptop's contents, casting doubt on its provenance. And the guiding assumption, or perhaps excuse, was that the laptop might be part of a Russian disinformation campaign. You even had 51 former intelligence officers, many with partisan leanings, that were quick to pen an open letter insisting the story had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. You ought to be pissed off, folks. Because this is the kind of story that helped give us deadhead, mentally ill, absolutely decrepit and in decline Joe Biden, because they buried this story. The talking point was dutifully echoed in major newspapers and on cable news. I mean, they were saying this could be a Kremlin plant. NBC, CNN, all others, they were raising suspicions that the emails could be forged, or the whole thing was just a dirty trick by old Rudy Giuliani and Russian hackers. So in short, the narrative was actively shaped to discredit or ignore the laptop's revelations rather than explore them. It shut it right down. You couldn't talk about it. These pictures right here, these images that you're seeing put up here, we couldn't show them back then. I'm still living with the penalties from the Google overlords over at YouTube for putting stuff like this out there because I was not afraid to talk about it. I sued Facebook. Because I was running for governor at the time and won a restraining order. They had to restore my account. Only person in Texas has ever done that and won. So for a time, they're using this suppression strategy And it worked. It succeeded. Discussion of the Hunter Biden laptop was confined to conservative media, online forums. It was virtually radioactive in the establishment press. And on the eve of the election, there were voters who had never even heard about the allegations in any depth, except perhaps to be told that there's nothing to see here. However, it's funny, as I said earlier, truth has a way of emerging even if it's delayed. But the results and the damage are too late. In the months after the 2020 election, safely removed from the campaign stakes, a trickle of acknowledgement started to kind of filter in. By 21 and 2022, the left of center outlets that earlier ignored or poured cold water on the laptop story, they just quietly sort of confirmed that, key materials from the laptop, they were okay, they were authentic. New York Times, Washington Post, each published belated reports verifying the emails and business communications from Hunter's hard drive. A forensic analysis by CBS News likewise affirmed that over 120,000 emails on the drive were genuine and untampered. In other words, the laptop was real, folks. Its contents, they were pretty nasty. They were pretty tawdry. They weren't fabricated by a foreign intelligence operation. And by May of 2023, even the FBI had publicly confirmed there was no evidence the laptop story was a part of any Russian disinformation scheme. In congressional hearings later on, you had former Twitter executives that admitted under oath that blocking the Hunter Biden story had been a mistake. They said, quote, "It isn't obvious what the right response is to a suspected but not confirmed cyber attack. Twitter erred in this case." That's what they said. That's what Yoel Roth said when he testified. If you've forgotten who Yoel Roth is, he's the company's former trust and safety head. He conceded that the company overreached. They overreached. Again, such mea culpa came long after the fact. So for many on the right, the entire saga stands as proof positive that mainstream media and big tech conspired consciously. Whether they did it consciously or not, I believe they did. They buried a story that could have harmed the Democratic nominee, only to quietly acknowledge the truth later on when it could no longer change the outcome. Polls subsequently, they showed that a significant number of voters would have factored the laptop revelations into their decision had they known about them. And so that fueled a bunch of claims that the election might have been swayed by media suppression. That's called interference, people. So whether or not one agrees with that assessment, the Hunter Biden laptop affair undeniably fed the narrative of a double standard in media. You had stories damaging to one side of the political spectrum are held to extreme skepticism or ignored, while those harming the other side are often run into thin sourcing. Just run it on the thin sourcing. The least amount of evidence. So you got this perception that deeply erodes the trust. Why in the hell should American citizens trust a press that appears to be picking winners and losers by what it reports or refuses to report? It's ridiculous. Oh, and while we're talking about Russian collusion, let's bring that back up. You had the narrative. Yeah, listen, you can't talk these days, you can't talk about media biases without talking about the Trump-Russia collusion saga. You can't do that. Dominated headlines. Created a complete and total narrative for years. You had this pinhead right here, Shifty Adam Schiff, pencil neck, who said he had undeniable proof. This guy needs to be in jail. He doesn't need to be sitting there in his pompous ass seat up there with his tie on, making rules for Americans like you and me. He shouldn't be up there doing that. He shouldn't be representing anybody. He should be in prison. He lied. Listen, if the Hunter Biden laptop was buried, well, then the Russia story, the collusion story, they amplified that thing to epic proportions. And in the end, you had, as a lot of conservatives will argue, their accusations outpaced any of the evidence. So you remember the atmosphere. You remember 2017? I do vividly, because I know what was happening to me, to my brand, to my social media, to my blogs, to my show. Just getting erased. I went from 750,000 unique website visitors a day on politicalcowboy.com, 750,000 visitors a day, down to 3,500 a day. Why? happened in 2017. It happened on January 27th, 2017. And I can tell you why. Because it was right after the inauguration of Trump, and they started doing it, and they said that Russia was colluding and running Facebook ads. And so anything we put out there, if you were conservative at all, you got slaughtered with the algorithm. You had major news organizations that were full of leaks, and they were all hinting that President Trump or his campaign had illicit ties to Moscow. You had the Steele dossier, which was just a compendium of salacious and unverified claims funded by Trump's political opponents. The DNC, Hillary Clinton paid for the damn thing. And they were just breathlessly covering it. These guys with their little thrill running up their leg on their cable news network. You had BuzzFeed. You had your pundits speculating constantly about what might emerge from the investigations, the Mueller report, creating a public expectation that proof of an enormous treasonous conspiracy was just around the corner. Night after night, primetime lineups, the message reinforced Trump equals Russian asset. To this day, you can't take your fat ass on X right now to not have some troll bot tell you that Trump is Putin's puppet and up Russia's ass. And so for those of you that are inclined to distrust Trump out there, it had that ring of plausibility. For Trump supporters, we had that maddening onslaught of insinuation. The Mueller investigation became the media's white whale. 2 years, every hint of a development, a meeting here, an indictment of a minor figure there, all of it treated as a potential smoking gun. Yet when the special counsel Robert Mueller's final report was released in 2019, the core finding, it stunned the press. Investigators, quote, did not establish that the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with Russia's election interference. Yep, that's right. So in plain terms, the exhaustive probe found no collusion. $30 million later. Oh, that's your money. And they spent it. They didn't find any collusion. There was Russian interference in the 2016 election, to be sure, but no evidence that Trump or his team illegally helped or were in on it. The grand narrative that had been promoted of Putin having a puppet in the White House, it fell apart. It collapsed. And for Trump and all of his allies, it was a great moment of vindication. For much of the media, it was a moment of abject embarrassment, or at least it should have been. As Rolling Stone, what's the guy's name? Matt Taibbi? He said, in purely journalistic terms, this is an epic disaster. You think, buddy? You think? He even argued that the media's handling of the Trump-Russia collusion story was a death blow for the reputation of the American news media, and it was. Harsh verdict, but it reflected how badly the press had oversold a narrative that did not pan out. Now, to be fair, the Trump-Russia affair, it was complex, right? Legitimate questions, they did exist about Trump associates and their contacts with Russia and with Russians, but the critique from the right and from the introspective journalists like Taibbi, that's the mainstream media lost all perspective on the story, and they abandoned the skepticism and proportionality that they should have had as objective journalists. Because again, he was guilty before they ever investigated it. You had these erroneous reports out there. They proliferated during this period. You had multiple outlets that had to correct the false stories about connections or meetings that never even happened. In one CNN case, you had a report that had to be retracted and led to the resignation of 3 journalists in 2017. You had another notorious incident where the Guardian's unverified claim that Trump's campaign chair visited Julian Assange, a story that remains unconfirmed yet gained tons of wide pickup. These were mistakes. They weren't random, folks. These weren't errors. You know why I know that? Because they all erred in the same direction. Every one of them went in the direction of exaggerating the Trump-Russia collusion narrative. So when Mueller's findings undercut the grand theory, the corrections and the follow-ups, they were muted compared to the orgy of the initial speculation. And what was the result? You had millions of Americans who trusted what they were hearing, and they felt misled. Millions of others who were skeptical felt vindicated in their belief that the media peddled a partisan witch hunt, and in the aftermath, conservative commentators would frequently invoke the Russia case whenever new allegations arose against Republicans. Quote, remember how sure they were about collusion, and they were wrong. Boy, and then they're going to go out and indict Trump on everything under the sun, and we're just supposed to believe the media reports. Yeah. So the Russian collusion saga has become a byword for media overreach, a cautionary tale of how confirmation bias and a get Trump mentality led much of the press off the rails. You with me? Let me check you now. Make sure you're in there. Float that American flag in there. I want to tell you guys, it's the truth. Ain't nobody else giving you this stuff on an afternoon podcast. What else did they lie to you about? What about COVID-19? What about COVID-19, 2020? You got the entire world grappling with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. You got people falling dead, supposedly, in the streets of China. They're welding people into their homes. And we're like, oh, my God, what's going to happen if that comes here to America? We're going to be burning bodies in the street. What's going to happen? Oh, we got to put a mask on. We got to obey the stickers on the floor at the grocery store. We got to make 6 feet distance. You got to say goodbye to grandma through the plexiglass while she dies alone at the nursing home. COVID-19. Oh, yeah. You had the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. We had two competing hypotheses that emerged. One, that the virus had spilled over naturally from animals, likely in a Wuhan wet market. And then you had the other one, it might have leaked from a virology lab in Wuhan, the city where the outbreak began. So in the early days of the pandemic, the natural origin theory quickly became the only acceptable narrative in most mainstream outlets. The lab leak idea as ridiculed. They vehemently dismissed as a conspiracy theory. You guys were wearing your tinfoil hats. And not just uncertain or unproven, but outright debunked. How dare anyone? You're a racist for saying such a thing. Anybody that suggested that the coronavirus, no, let's call it what it was, the novel coronavirus, the vocabulary just took over our language and society. Oh, yeah. It might, if you said it might not be entirely naturally occurring, we ought to ask some questions. And let me remind you, damn it, I'm still getting penalized over on YouTube for saying these things. We'll probably have to delete this video over there. I'm ready to go Rumble exclusive, baby. Give me a deal over here. If you were to say something like that, you were met with hostility. You were labeled as pushing misinformation. Whenever Senator Tom Cotton cautiously raised the lab origin question in February of 2020, the New York Times denounced it as a fringe conspiracy. The Washington Post read a headline that literally chided Cotton for repeating a theory that was already debunked. That is exactly what they said. Now, the implication was that even asking the question was irresponsible. Remember that? You had major science writers, fact checkers, echoed it. Oh, man, the uncertainty. September 2020, PolitiFact went so far as to label the lab leak idea, quote, inaccurate and ridiculous. That was a ruling, by the way, which they would later retract in 2021 when the evidence evolved. You had everybody from fake scientist Bill Nye, the science guy, to whatever the other non-science black dude is, Tyson. What's his damn name? I don't care. You had social media companies. They were banning content. They were banning people, deplatformed, demonetized. It was a drama nightmare. Facebook famously, if you'll remember, they banned the claims that COVID-19 was man-made or manufactured, treating all of that as false information. You had posts that were positing that a lab origin were removed. Anything you said about that, users were suspended for discussing it. The media, the tech ecosystem, they declared the matter settled. COVID-19 came from nature, period, suggested you say anything otherwise, you were both wrong and morally suspect. You were evil for saying such a thing. Just to insinuate that you were rooted in xenophobia or some kind of an intent to shift blame to the Chinese people. But as months passed, you had more information that trickled out that made the lab leak hypothesis sort of increasingly plausible. And by early 2021, scientists and researchers, including some of those who had initially discounted the lab theory, suddenly they called for a full investigation into the virus's origins. So May 2021, you had 18 prominent scientists. They published a letter in Science magazine that urged the opening of consideration of maybe a lab accident happened. So around the same time, the U.S. intelligence community, they revealed that 3 researchers from the Wuhan Institute of Virology had fallen mysteriously ill in November 2019, which lent weight to the suspicions. Suddenly, what had been labeled a conspiracy wasn't so easily dismissed anymore. So the media, they did an about-face on the whole issue. Oh, it was stark. It was striking. News organizations that once mocked the lab leak theory as a kooky notion, well, they found themselves reporting on it seriously. Did COVID leak from a lab? It became a legitimate question on evening newscasts by mid-2021. Facebook totally reversed its ban on discussing man-made COVID claims, citing ongoing investigations into the origin. And the over certain narrative, it cracked. They lied. It turned out there was never conclusive evidence against the lab leak idea in the first place. Just a premature consensus enforced in part by politics. And so, New York Magazine's Jonathan Chait, he said many mainstream journalists dismissed the lab leak hypothesis out of hand as a conspiracy theory for a mix of reasons. Yeah. You know what it was? It was on the over-reliance of a few outspoken and possibly conflicted health experts to a reflexive rebuttal of anything the Trump administration supported. So in Chait's blunt words, rather than meet lies with truth, the media often met it with other lies. See, that is confronted with what they saw as Trump's falsehoods and Chinese propaganda. Some folks in the media countered with unwarranted certainty of their own, effectively just preventing unproven assumptions as fact. So by 2022 and 23, even government authorities like the FBI and the Department of Energy lent credence to the lab leak as more likely origin. And the media finally was reporting that these developments widely, as a far cry from 2020 when the topic was virtually verboten on the major networks, conservatives often highlight this whiplash-inducing shift as proof of bias. No kidding. The lab leak theory was not a crackpot idea, folks. You weren't wearing a tinfoil hat. Suddenly, it had been treated like a crazy idea by the media gatekeepers because it was associated with the Trump administration or feared to stoke prejudice. And in doing so, guess what? The press arguably stifled a valid line of inquiry for critical months. Think of all that we lost. Think of all that we lost because of the media lied. And when the permitted narrative flipped, there were a few apologies. They were weak. You know, the Atlantic came out with, oh, we want amnesty. No amnesty. No forgiveness. Why? Because you've been doing this for 50 years since the fall of Saigon and even earlier. You guys haven't changed. You guys, you know what? All that is when you're asking for your forgiveness and your amnesty and all your crap, it's an echo of an earlier time, decades ago. The same people that proposed that ulcers were caused by bacteria, not stress. And those people were mocked until proven right. And now here are those that posited that a lab origin were stigmatized until enough evidence accumulated. And so the COVID origin debate, it became another exhibit in the conservative case that media objectivity often takes a backseat to narrative control with dangerous implications for the truth. Now, there you go. There's some examples. I mean, we just had one the other day. What was it? The press conference, or not the press conference, the press dinner the other night where the guy says, hey, we got it wrong on Joe Biden. We missed it. We had a media story about a guy that we knew was in mental decline, but we didn't talk about it. We missed it. No, you didn't miss it. You didn't miss it. You knew it. You knew it and you lied about it. You purposefully lied about it, you bottom-dwelling, scum-sucking, trash human beings. And you're no different now than you have been for generations, going all the way back 50 years ago today to the fall of Saigon. You guys are lying examples of scum humanity. Covington Catholic kids, Hunter Biden's laptop, Russia Gate, lab leak. 24/7 digital media age, but in some ways, you know what? The patterns haven't changed. You would think with 24/7 media coverage, 8-9 days a week, dadgummit, you would think that they would somehow stumble into the freaking truth, but they don't. You know why? Because it's bias. Whether it's by omission or spin, it has been the challenge in journalism all along. You have this poignant historic parallel I'm trying to give you. Then I want you to see. I want you to compare it. The fall of Saigon, 1975, the end of the Vietnam War. In the final days of that conflict, Americans saw on their TV screens the dramatic images of helicopters evacuating U.S. embassy personnel, desperate South Vietnamese allies as North Vietnamese forces took Saigon. And those scenes were reported, yeah. They were impossible to ignore. But guess what? They just did it for a moment, and then they turned the blind eye. And what came after received far less coverage. The communist victors in Vietnam, the Khmer Rouge in neighboring Cambodia, they imposed brutal reprisals, re-education camps. I've told you this, imprisonments, executions. mass exodus of refugees known as the boat people. Millions fleeing Vietnam by sea in the late 1970s, risking death to escape the new regime. Yet, according to later analyses, American media paid no attention to the suffering of the Vietnamese refugees. You had one scholarly review that said the lack of media coverage of the boat people crisis left the general public largely unaware of the Vietnamese struggle since it barely pierced the newspapers and broadcasts of the time. I still remember Second Baptist Church, Augusta, Georgia, where I grew up. I was a small child there when the Cambodian refugees came, and we housed them, and they lived there, and they made their homes in Augusta, Georgia, where I was a small child, where I was growing up. We took care and brought in and housed the Cambodian refugees. I remember, as a small child, the boat people. The media left it largely ignored. Right here in the U.S., once Saigon fell, the dominant narrative for the many was that simply that Vietnam War was over and best forgotten. Spit on the GIs that are coming home. The protesters won. The ongoing plight of those that were left behind was an inconvenient story that didn't receive the sustained sympathetic coverage that one might have expected if the media were truly objective chroniclers of humanitarian crises. So don't let them preach to you now about what's going on with illegal aliens. Don't let them preach to you about the MS-13 gang members in Maryland who was just a Maryland dad, even though he clearly has MS-13 gang signs on his fingers, tattooed there. And a guy like Terry Moran is going to sit down in the Oval Office across from the President of the United States and call him a liar and say that the images are photoshopped. You know, to conservatives, this little historical footnote, 50 years after the fall of Saigon, it should be instructive. So when a story doesn't fit the prevailing narrative or the audience's appetite, you know, listen, it might fade into darkness regardless of its moral urgency. But during the Vietnam era, much of the media had turned against the war, so there was little zeal to highlight the dire consequences of the U.S. withdrawal, and in so doing, might have cast doubt on the wisdom of the anti-war cause. So you know what they did? They sided with the freaking protesters. Does that sound familiar at all to you today? The brainwashed, agenda-driven narrative. And today, a lot of people would argue a very similar dynamic is happening. You got a story that might undercut a narrative that mainstream journalists believe is for the greater good. For example, you know, they're going to focus on violent crime spikes or riots could help a law and order political message. Some outlets seem less eager to cover those trends in depth. I mean, God forbid there's a school shooting and the person doesn't check all the boxes to fit the media narrative, because now we got to use that for gun control. You got reporting extensively on a border crisis. You know, it might validate a political talking point that they disagree with. You know, the coverage, they mute that. They don't want to tell you what was going on under the Biden administration. The mainstream media is not going to tell you that the border's closed 99.999%, that there were only 3 encounters last week at the southern border. So I call it the Saigon syndrome. It's alive and well today, folks. Certain truths downplayed or ignored. The lesson from Saigon's fall and its aftermath is a cautionary tale. The media, they can effectively erase realities by simply not covering them. And when the media spotlight moves on, the entire human tragedies can unfold in the shadows. You know, that's why they talk about Ukraine, but they don't talk about Sudan. They don't talk about Nigeria. They don't talk about Saharan Africa. They don't talk about genocides there because it doesn't sell. This isn't to equate the media's neglect of Vietnamese refugees with, say, the sidelining of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The stakes are obviously different, but the underlying critique is the same. An agenda-setting press decides what the public gets to know and what gets buried. And so for a healthy democracy, a healthy republic, that power has got to be wielded carefully, with honesty, and with accountability. So conservatives like us, you know, we're worried that that's not happening. That indeed history is repeating itself. It certainly is rhyming, and in new forms. And we have no trust. It's all eroded, fractured discourse, completely divided. Every case that I've mentioned today, a viral confrontation, a reframed scandal suppressed, a narrative that's overhyped, a theory prematurely dismissed, all of that's contributed to this growing erosion of public trust in the media. People don't easily forget being misled or feeling like important information was withheld. So over time, these incidents accumulate into a broader impression that the mainstream media simply can't be relied upon to tell the whole truth. And the result has been polarization, not just of opinions, but of facts, or at least of what different groups accept as facts. And America is increasingly a nation with parallel media universes. The more traditional outlets still command an audience largely on the left and center, while the right gravitate to an alternative ecosystem, whether it's talk radio, podcast, Fox News, Newsmax, whatever those platforms may be. You know why that happens? It's precisely because those people felt alienated from the mainstream media. That's why the legacy media is dead in the water. And both sides are going to sit there and point at each other's media and say, fake news, fake news, fake news. And the data, the polls on trust reflects the chasm. Confidence in mass media is at 31% in this country. I mean, that's historic low. But that, that top line number there, it's going to reveal something even larger in terms of the stark partisan divide. Only about 3 in 10 Americans, as I told you earlier, trust the media. And even then, it's a skeptical trust. People used to listen to the news. 12% of Republicans voiced trust in the media in 2022. That's a collapse of faith, folks. The majority of Republicans, that's like 51% in one poll, say flatly that the media is the enemy of the people, just like Trump said. Democrats say 54%. 54% of Democrats still express a trust in the media. And that's lower than it was in a few years, but it remains remarkably higher than the GOP's trust level. So liberals and progressives tend to have a far more confident, view of the mainstream outlets, which align with their tendency to dominate those institutions. That's why the media is gone for people like you and me. Dangerous reality, folks. The United States no longer has a broadly trusted common information source or set of facts. That's why what we do is important. Talking about things, having an open forum, town square conversation like this, that's why it's important. That's why Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, converting it to X, making it a place where people could talk. There's still some problems there, but at least we got to say some things. Because we feel like the media establishments betrayed us by distorting and omitting the truth. And, you got liberals who feel that the conservative media is just spreading misinformation and forcing mainstream outlets to, act as bulwarks of truth. And so we got this feedback loop that's just intensifying, folks. The trust is gone. It evaporates. And we don't have the fourth estate anymore because the function to operate that way, it doesn't work for the media anymore. It's over. Let me ask you a question. How can the press, this is a serious question. I'm drawing this to a close. Thank you for staying with me. Got a couple of minutes. How can the press hold leaders to account if half the country automatically assumes the press is lying? Let that sink in. How can citizens debate policies if they can't even agree on basic events because they heard 2 entirely different versions? Worse, public cynicism extends beyond media to other institutions, and that's going to corrode the very fabric of civic discourse. So if one believes the news is mostly propaganda or partisan spin, the natural reaction is to dismiss inconvenient facts as fake and embrace only information that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs. See, that's a human tendency. That's confirmation bias. That's the big word for it. It's always been there, but an environment of polarized media, it's on steroids, folks. We see the consequences. You got debates around the big issues, elections, vaccines, protests, whatever, valid elections. And they all devolve into dueling realities. So each side can cite its own experts and media reports, and the other side finds wholly unconvincing. You want to prove it? Get on X and make a statement about something that you believe in, and they say, well, where's your source? And share a Fox News deal. Oh, well, Fox News doesn't count. Because it doesn't confirm their confirmation bias. You see, to have a republic, to have a free society, to have a democracy, if you will, a threat to democracy, well, that depends on a baseline of shared reality, and that is undermined when media credibility fails. And so for many conservatives, the takeaway from the past decade is that the mainstream media did this to itself. Let them have the consequences. So by seemingly choosing sides and shaping narratives, the press lost the room. So when I'm in Washington, D.C. the other day and they said, the new press, I'm not the press, I'm not a journalist, but I was there to ask questions. And we did ask questions. And the mainstream, and people say, what are your qualifications for being there? None. But what are the qualifications for the mainstream media who has consistently omitted the truth or bent the truth in order to fit their narrative? You tell me what qualifications those assholes have. Now, why should we believe anybody? I mean, the media's never admitted how wrong they were before. That's right. In cases like Covington or the lab leak, even, when corrections came, they kind of felt begrudging, and they were far less prominent than the initial coverage. And the trust is broken. Apologies whispered later don't easily repair it. And with each new controversy, the slope gets more slippery, and it fuels even more extreme reactions. It's not a surprise when the vitriolic chants of CNN sucks or the blanket dismissal of anything from the New York Times is, biased have become political rallying points on the right. Nor is it surprising that on the left, many now view anything from, anything that comes out of the mouth of Fox News or Newsmax or any right-wing talk or Bannon's War Room or Charlie Kirk or Dear America, all of that is just tainted propaganda. And the nation's information streams, they've balkanized, and they have civic unity has become so much harder to achieve. No wonder we're divided, folks. We're at a crossroads right now. Where do we go from here? We don't have an honest media. If you listen to the conservative voices, the answer begins with accountability. There's a hunger for reform, a desire to see the media held responsible for misreporting the bias and to encourage a more balanced, truthful press. And I don't know, what does that entail? I mean, maybe we need more transparency and corrections. The media outlets need to prominently correct errors and admit missteps. And I mean, do it prominently. You don't bury the corrections, in the 7th page of Section E. Don't put it in the fine print or by an asterisk. Don't make it a vague editor's note weeks later when a story is botched, like the Covington deal or the Russia deal. Own up to it and clearly, loudly, and say it. We were wrong. Show the work. Release the transcripts. Give us the context, the source data whenever possible, so the audience can see how conclusions were reached. Now they're talking about, subpoenaing journalists so they can tell who their leaks are or who their whistleblowers and who their sources are. That shouldn't happen. We shouldn't have to have that stuff going on in this country. But that's the nature of what we've built. One of the complaints is that national newsrooms are, just monolithically liberal in worldview. And there's a lot of conservatives out there, and I think they're right. They argue that if more editors and reporters and decision makers in the media came from the heartland, center-right or diverse ideological backgrounds, there would be fewer blind spots and less groupthink. That's why I love Scott Jennings being on CNN. Let's have some concrete proposals that include purposeful recruitment of journalists from different political persuasions and establishing internal checks so that a prevailing narrative is challenged before publication. And given the outsized role of social media in all the information we're consuming, all of its dissemination, you've got a lot of calls out there that have grown to rein in big tech censorship power. We need to have that. We had the congressional hearings in 2023, hauled in Twitter and Facebook executives to grill them on suppressing stories like the Hunter Biden laptop. And a lot of people on the right advocate for reforms to ensure that tech platforms don't collude, even indirectly, with government or partisan actors to censor news. So maybe we change we make changes to Section 230 liability protections or new legislation asserting political neutrality requirements for the major platforms to prevent a handful of Silicon Valley companies from effectively acting as information gatekeepers. I mean, we need more ambitiously, we need some conservatives out there, and thank God, for the Laura Loomers of the world, different people out there. You might not like them. I mean, they can be, bombastic and boisterous. I get it. They can be over the top. But, some conservatives push for, breaking up that concentrated media industry or eliminating perceived state support. I mean, back in 1980, I think the media outlets were owned by like 40 different conglomerates. Now they're owned by 5, which means only a handful of people in this country control the narrative. I mean, for instance, in a policy blueprint, you had Project 2025, right? Project 2025, they had a proposal to strip public broadcasters like NPR and PBS of the federal funding and social legal status. A lot of you would agree with that. The argument is that if taxpayer money is going to be used, it should not fund media that half the country perceives as partisan bullshit. I mean, Project 2025, Project 2025, I can't believe you're talking about. You know what? It had some good stuff in it. It actually envisions using antitrust enforcement against big tech and perhaps large media conglomerates, not purely on economic competition grounds, but to combat their politico-cultural influence. And you know what? It might be controversial, but these ideas reflect the belief that drastic measures are needed to restore a healthy media ecosystem in this country. So whether all or any of these reforms happen, the pressure is certainly on, media organizations. You got to put it on there. They got to be aware they're under the microscope. They're being watched. And not just from their traditional critics. No, trust in the media is so low that even many political independents and moderate observers have joined the call for introspection. And we have seen some encouraging signs out there. I mean, there's a few high-profile journalists that have broken from the pack, gotten out of the ranks, admitted that their industry's failing. I mean, we've got, there's a lot of them after the Russiagate thing and all the nonsense that went on. You got New York Times scolding their outlets for bias. There's other platforms. You got Substack. Everybody's going to Substack. You got the newsletters. You got the podcast, independent journalists. You know who they answer to? Their readers. And they create content unconstrained by legacy media's narratives and their publishers and some traditional outlets that have felt compelled to follow suit with more open-minded coverage to retain credibility. But it's an uphill battle, folks, and I think I've beat this horse half to death. That's a mouthful I was yelling at you. It's going to take a lot more than finger pointing, though. You can't just look at the press and demand that consumers. Listen. We demand better. We deserve better. I don't want to be, under the tutelage of Lenin's Pravda and their communist, brainwashing. I don't want that. We got to make our voices heard. That's why we say, build the algorithms, boost the algorithms, get in the chat. That's why it's so important to us that we do this. And we got to turn off those outlets that refuse to just build trust in us. And let's start looking to the voices that we listen to. That's why I'm so thankful that people listen to this show or the Dear America show or the other guys that are out there. Because those other guys are going to continue to become irrelevant, folks. We're in a crisis. We're in a crisis. Facts are being not just omitted, man. They're feeding a narrative. And it is disgusting to me. So we got to have the responsibility and accountability. Boy, howdy. All right. That's enough about that. That's enough about that. I think you get the point. It is the 50-year anniversary of the Fall of Saigon. April 30th, 1975. And in the last 50 years, the media hasn't done anything any different. And that's the root, my friend, of media bias. Nothing changes. Melee 81, thank you, Chad. Great conversation. You hit the nail on the head. Thank you very much. I get pretty fired up on this topic. J. Ham Stoneface, you said Fox News and Taint in the same sentence worth 5 ducats. Yeah, you ain't wrong. I mean, similar locations on occasion. Yeah. I love it, man. We get on there and talk about the media and give you all a little history lesson and all that. We get a couple of little super chats, and one of them, 50% of our super chats today talked about taint. Where am I going to be? I'm going to be in Mount Pleasant, Texas this Saturday. Going to be at His Glory Ranch out there. It's noon. Going to be noon to like 6 out there, so bring your lawn chair. Come hang out with us, East Texas. You can go to watchchad.com. That's where all the fun stuff is. And then next week on the, man, can you believe it's May? Oh. On the 8th, 9th, and 10th, going to be Raleigh, North Carolina, Marion, Virginia, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Lots of stuff coming up. Week after that, Lawton, Oklahoma. Go to watchchad.com. Get on my Make Wellness team, man. You don't want to know why I'm fired up? I got energy. I can get on here, man, and I can rock and roll on Dear America and also give you guys some historical stuff right here. Because I'm on my peptides, baby. I'm on my peptides. Yeah. Look at this. Look at that. I wish I still looked like that. Look at that little airbrush. Look at that face. What a young face. So young and innocent. And just didn't know what the world held. I mean, that's 10 years ago. I'm still doing decent, I think. That 7 p.m. for His Glory Ranch is not the right time. I told my guy to change that. It's not the right time. It starts at noon. We'll be there. And go back up, scroll back up. If you go to watchchad.com, you're like, I don't want to be. Listen, you can get these products. You ain't got to do nothing. Go to that little Make Wellness thing. Look at my face again. That was the Energize. That's what I'm drinking, the Fit right here. Like drinking orange juice. So good. Inflammation, go. Nobody clicks likes on here. Let's see what you're doing. See, 163 likes out of 509 people. We're going to play around. We're going to play around a little bit with what time this show is going to come on in the days ahead. We really want to work with the folks over at Rumble to get maybe some of that live feature stuff, because I think this is information the world needs. I really do. I'm doing the work out here. I'm trying to find you guys some stuff that I think will help you, educate you, and make you think. So anyway, God bless you guys. I certainly appreciate all of you. and don't trust anybody except me. You guys are amazing. I want to say thank you to my producer, David Medina. Follow him at David Medina PDX. That is information and content on Instagram. You don't want to miss it. At David Medina PDX. Follow him. And you can follow at Party Foul Steve over on Venmo. That's where he likes to be followed. That's his social media of choice. He's sick. Pray for Party Foul Steve. He's got the crud going around. I hope he gets better. I got things to do, and I need him around. Certainly, he's got to drive me this weekend because that's what he does. That's what he does. What else? What else? What else? Anything in the chat? Anything we need to talk about before we get out of here? I think we got to go. It is 10 minutes after 2, and I have run along. I love you guys. God bless you. Take care of yourselves. Stay strapped and keep your head on a swivel. TikTok for Dear America. Don't you go anywhere. Oh, Hot Seat Todd. Todd is going to be here at 3 o'clock. And then Meggie Moves this evening, Brianna Morello. So come on. Let's rock and roll, baby. I love y'all. God bless you. And I will talk to you in the morning for Dear America. Be good.